Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. We're taking time to discuss construction materials testing and inspection with people in the know. From exploring testing problems and solutions to laboratory best practices and quality management, we're covering topics important to you. Now, here's our host, Brian Johnson.
Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. I'm Brian Johnson.
And I'm Kim Swanson, and we have another PSP Insights episode this week.
This week, we're going to talk about the aggregate gradation and gravity samples with John Malusky, our program director for the Proficiency Sample Program.
Glad to be here, Brian.
And Ryan LaQuay, the laboratory and testing manager for the Proficiency Sample Program.
Thanks, Brian.
So, John, let's take it from the top with the aggregate samples, since some of us may not remember the big change that took place last year. Go over that first and then lead us into what is new this year.
We made the decision in 2022 to switch the aggregate programs from our traditional fine aggregate and coarse aggregate samples and reorganize them a little bit more based off of the tests that were included in the scopes. So we changed the program to have a gradation and gravity sample, which is exactly what it says. Most of the tests involved in the scheme are gradation or specific gravity. And then we adjusted the other scope, the other program, which comes out in January. And that sample is degradation. So that covers your Los Angeles abrasion, sulfate soundness, basically anything we're going to break apart rock, some sort of other capacity than simple gradation. Just made it more efficient, more reasonable to process and package. It actually saved a little bit of money for our customers. The reorganization, I think, if I remember, gave around 60% of our customers a little bit of a discount. So that's always nice to pass that on to people. So that's kind of where we came from. And that's where we're at right now.
And this year with the aggregate sample, what kind of tests do we have other than gradation and specific gravity? Is there anything else that you threw in the mix?
The only two tests that are not part of the gradation and gravity scheme are the sand equivalent and the uncompacted void content. However, the void content does require the determination of the finite gravity. So you kind of need it anyway to do the test. So that's why that one's in there. And then to have the finite portion for the sand equivalent, it just made a lot of sense to keep it where it was at.
Now, what's the reception been with the combined sample from customers? Because I know some customers are used to just testing the same stockpile over and over again. So I don't know if they were as interested in the combined sample as maybe some of the other testing laboratories that are used to testing just a bag of aggregate. What have you heard?
I don't believe we actually heard any comments regarding the changes as being problematic. Most of them, I believe they found it more efficient because we had an overwhelming number of the participants only participate in gradation and gravity portions of the samples. So, once again, it stopped the laboratories from having to purchase a second sample that came at a different time of the year and a few more tests that were segregated. So it just seemed like it made a lot of sense for us to reorganize and restructure. And we haven't really had any complaints about the reorganization. But if I would go back to some situations that we had last year, and I can pinpoint two, and maybe Ryan can also chime in. So the first one that we ran into was a problem with the bags last year. We packaged the gradation bags in just a large open-ended 3 mil plastic bag. And for some reason, the lot of bags that we used had a lot of defects in the seams. So we had ruptures, and we had, the gradation sample, which is the most critical sample to have homogeneous, spill out in the bottom of the boxes. And I think we sent between 50 and 100 replacements to participants last year. So we revamped, looked at what we could do from our bag suppliers and the producers. And we actually found a larger slide lock bag that actually has a leak and rupture resistant coating on it to try to help alleviate that situation. So fortunately, I think we only had 2 or 3 samples this year that had to be replaced due to bag ruptures. So corrective action, success. Let's rubber stamp that one as complete and we'll move on. And then Ryan, you want to talk a little bit about what we saw with the gradation and having to add a little bit more? Go for it.
Before we move on, not to overlook it, the key addition with those bags, there's a slide lock. So no more staples going into those bags and making more holes for more material to roll out of. We were super excited about it, and it showed in the sample quality that actually stayed together. So that was huge.
Did you say slide lock?
Yep. So like the zip slides, like on your storage bags.
Right.
Pull across, yeah. We don't have to staple them anymore. We don't have to zip tie them. None of those other methods. You just pull across.
No rubber bands.
No rubber bands.
So here's the other cool thing, and this is like for the future for 2024, soil classification, degradation, and CBR and R value will now be in slide locks because we found a manufacturer who produces the bags that are big enough, thick enough, and all have the rupture resistant coating on it. So no more staples through bags, no more rubber bands, no more zip ties.
The future is now.
The future is now for PSP. Slide locks are here.
I love that. And I love that you're this excited about it because I can appreciate the excitement, but I am loving to hear about the joys that you get from having the continual improvement for better quality of samples, but then for the people actually assembling thousands of these, it helps everyone out. So I'm glad you're so excited about it though.
Mm-hmm.
You know how sore your forearms are and how you can't grip anything after you pick up a box, a box that weighs about 15 pounds, spin it, and then have to pull a zip tie over it. By the end of the day, it's kind of brutal.
Yeah. What, 600 reps a day? Easy?
Yeah.
That's a great improvement from a production standpoint. I know I haven't logged as many hours back there as I used to, but I remember those days of putting rubber bands on, and the staples were more of a liability.
Production side, the staples would jam often and have to get reloaded often.
Oh, that's true.
So it would always get a little slowdown, especially whenever it stopped doing what it's supposed to do. So much better for production, so much better for shipping. It's been fantastic.
So how do you? I'm sorry to stay on the zip bags because it is a major technological development that came out of probably the 70s. But how are you able to keep the bags open with that? Is there like a frame that goes down in like a tube or something?
The bags
To
are
keep
large
them
enough
from
to fold
closing?
right over the flaps of the box.
Really?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
there's
so-
excess bag. Like it's not
Amazing.
the bag isn't tight to the material. There's extra space, but yeah.
Ryan, I feel like we should get T-shirts made that say "The future is now" with a
Yeah.
picture of a slide
Yeah,
lock
just
bag on the
slider.
bottom of it.
Yep.
I'm game for that.
You did it.
I'm
Congratulations. Why wasn't
excited.
this? Sorry, go ahead, Kim.
No, I'm excited how excited Brian is now because you got like you're very invested in this and I really honestly love it so much. But continue with your question, Brian, because I think I know where you were going with that.
Well, I don't think you do. I was gonna ask you, Kim, why was this not in the annual report so we could brag about the use of these slide lock bags to the entire Committee on Materials and Pavements?
I can only put in what information is given to me. This is also a new development for me as I don't go back into the packaging area nearly as often, a 100% decrease of what I was doing previously. So this is new information for me. So I could not share that with the world. I would also put it on our social media. Don't think I'm not going to. I wrote that down.
This is probably going to be a little bit surprising, but it took us almost 2.5 months to find the right size of slide lock bags, because to make them 2 feet by 2 feet is a pretty large slide lock bag. So it took a little while. So there's some research done by our production manager, and here we go. We're ready to roll. Game changer for PSP.
Yeah, one last question about these bags. What was the what was the normal application or the typical application for those bags before they were the proficiency sample bags? Anybody know?
I
Like,
think
what were they used for? What industry used these?
everything. I mean, it's
Everything?
Yeah, like so basically any other industry where you're putting something in, whether it's like marbles or I don't know, just stuff, like there are bags all over the place for things. It's crazy.
What did this do to the cost of packaging?
We're talking maybe 50 cents more per bag, which is actually like a 50% increase in the cost of the bags. The bags are pretty cheap. Most of the fees, when you look at the proficiency sample fees, that is specifically tied up in shipping. It's not cheap to ship 15, 20, 30 pound boxes of rocks and aggregate and all that other good stuff around the world. That's where it gets expensive.
Okay, well, let's talk about the shipping. What did we ship this year for the aggregate samples? How much material?
So the gradation and gravity samples contain 2 bags. The first bag was about 3 kilograms, and that was the mix of fine and coarse, which is used for the sieve analysis portion. And then we sent one bag that was all minus number 4 material, and that was about 2.5 kilograms. So the total sample weight, including the box, is right around 6 kilograms. So what is that? 15 change pounds, 16 pounds, 17 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. But we sent almost 4,400.
Wow, that's a lot of aggregate. How many countries were involved in this one?
This is our largest sample that is included in our sample schemes in our program. If I had to guess, just about every international or country internationally that is a participant would have received one of these. I'd be shocked if we didn't hit just about every one of them. The one thing that I do want to point out is some of the challenges that we've had to deal with when it comes to the sample bags of material themselves. Just really, really want to point out the emphasis on the 2 different types of material in each bag. So that first bag that we were talking about, that's the roughly 3,000 grams of material. It's already pre-dried, and that is the one that's been used for the gradation portion. So that sample you would use for your coarse and fine sieve analysis as a mixed gradation. Once you're finished with the wash and gradation portion, you scalp off anything that's plus number 4, and then use that for coarse aggregate specific gravity. So we've been running into a lot of confusion with the participants as to how to handle the samples. Some laboratories think that they need to be using that and they need to split it, or they need to split it between coarse and fine and then run sieve analyses on each of them. And that's not the case. It should be treated as a bulk sieve analysis sample, right from the get-go. So when you get that product in the 3,000 gram bag, you're gonna, get the initial dry weight, wash it, dry it, get your T11 value or C117, and then run your sieve analysis beyond that. So it's a little bit different than what we've done in the past. And then the second bag that we send is the 2,500 moist aggregate bag that is for the fine ag specific gravity sand equivalent and uncompacted void content. So there was also a little kink in this year's round too. The fine aggregate bag, that moist sample that we sent out, had a very high percent passing the 200 in preliminary testing. And we received a lot of questions about what people were calling was a deviation in the T84 C128 specific gravity, the fine ag gravity. And that was, we asked the participants to split the sample out appropriately to get their roughly 1,000 grams that they would need for the fine ag specific gravity, and then wash it first. Normally, the standard verbatim does not indicate that you should wash it first. You just prepare it according to standard and test it. However, if you look in the appendix, I believe, appendix is non-mandatory information if I remember correctly. Yep. If the percent passing the 200 in your sample is a little bit higher, say like 6-7%, it's recommended that the sample be washed first over the number 200 to reduce variability. Those fine aggregate particles, the P200, will absorb moisture and actually could possibly get stuck inside some of the other larger particles and or essentially adhere to the outside, causing an inaccurate saturated surface dry value, which will really throw off the actual specific gravity of the material and cause way more variability. So we included that in the instructions, and we got, oh man, Ryan, would you say hundreds of calls?
I was averaging at least 5 a day. Yeah.
About all of this. So rest assured, I promise everyone it's in there, and we looked for it and we knew it was there. So hopefully everyone followed the instructions according to what we laid out.
Yeah, I had the appendix printed out in front of my computer for about a month and a half, just because after the first few days of getting calls, like, I'm just going to have this on hand.
So the instructions in the standard tell you to do this, but it's in the appendix.
It's the instructions in the standards do not tell you to do this, but the appendix does.
The appendix does, but you referred to the appendix in your sample round instructions, which many people did not read.
Well, that's the issue, is that we didn't actually say where we were pulling this information from. We just said, hey, do this thing.
Okay.
So in the future, we could have been a little more clear on where we're bringing this information from, or this directions from. It's there. We could have guided it a little better.
Okay. All right. Lesson learned.
So did people think you were just making it up and that's what the problem was?
Like, well, we do this all the time. What are you talking about? Things like that. Just want to make sure it's not a typo, which I do appreciate. And so this call back to a couple episodes ago. I don't think they'll listen, but I said I'd rather have people call and ask the questions first, then do the thing, submit the data, and then question after the fact. They certainly took it to heart this time.
The other good part about that is that the laboratories were also calling and questioning about washing prior to running the sand equivalent.
Mhm.
The sand equivalent specifically says you don't wash it because then you're washing all the silt out of it.
Yeah, that's
So if you
the
do that,
point.
you don't know what a sand equivalent is. So the good part is they were asking questions. We just need to make sure that we're more clear.
So you had them split it, then wash half of it?
That was the other issue, is we didn't say split it. And people just
Okay.
read it top down of step 1, step 2, step 3, because that's traditionally how you just go through it. If we'd said split this out and then run here, run there, that may have been a little better for people.
Yeah,
It
2024 instructions will be laid out that way, that we're going to be splitting that bag of the fine aggregate in the moist condition to basically pull your sub-sample first and then run the tests.
So from a corrective actions perspective, a laboratory that received low ratings on sand equivalent because they washed it all first would have a pretty reasonable corrective action, because they basically ruined the sample by washing it for that
Yeah.
test.
We did
Sand
have a couple
equivalent
people reach
test.
out like, hey, we ran this, or we washed it and we ran it. It's like, this can't be right. And we shipped
Right.
them a new one because
Okay, that's good. Good for those labs for calling out ahead of time, and good for you guys for making enough samples for shipping those extra samples in anticipation of some issues. Hopefully, we still have some for extra proficiency samples.
so we have plenty for extra proficiency samples, but we actually had to go and make more. Basically, after we first started getting a couple calls of like, hey, here's these issues, we just went into the back and basically rebatched and just remade the gradation samples again.
Is that the aggregate in the front of the building right now?
No, that is actually what's out in front, John. Is that C-sterile stuff still?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the remainder of the concrete sample that'll be coming out for CCRL here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, we just took the leftover material and just batched out new bags and set them off to the side so we could just grab them and ship them out.
How did the data look knowing all of this?
Well, the data was interesting. We actually had to make a suppression for 2 line items for this round for the sieve analysis portion. The percent passing, the 16 sieve or the 1.18 millimeter, and the number 30 sieve, the 600 micron sieve, had to be suppressed. And basically what happened was we saw too much of, or I guess I should say the distribution for sample 3 was almost 3 times as large as the distribution for sample 4. So something happened with sample 3, we believe, where there was some additional variability. We don't know what happened. Upon conducting the data analysis and looking at the homogeneity data, I talked to our production manager. We went over the production process, looked at our reports and our preparation logs. Every normal protocol that we follow was followed. There was no deviation, nothing changed. So we're not sure what happened. It was interesting. So I know it's suppressed, and the listeners here unfortunately won't be able to see the Uden diagram. Normally the Uden diagram and the ellipse is on a nice looking 45-degree angle. This time the ellipse was actually turned to the left to be almost parallel with the, I guess it would be the x-axis. So the average is there, and it's just a really, really wide distribution. We're not 100% sure what happened. One of the interesting things that the PSP crew noted to me when they were actually sieving the product, they said they noticed that they had a few drums that seemed like they were more coarse than the other drums, and a few drums that were way more fine than the other drums. But the materials all put through the same sieving machines. It's randomly, sorted together. It's not like it's segregated. We didn't segregate 3 into 4. We had drums here, drums there, like they were all pulled at random. So the fact that we had something like this happen is definitely a rarity.
Well, that's interesting. And normally I would ask Joe, the next question is, okay, what does that mean for accreditation? But I will ask myself that question.
Hey, Brian, what does this mean for accreditation?
Thank you for jumping in there, Ryan. Well, it does complicate things a little bit for us. First of all, because of the issue, and because we suspend for repeat consecutive low ratings and no data on individual sieve sizes, there won't be any new suspensions for low ratings on number 16 and number 30, because the ratings are suppressed on both 3 and 4, even though 3 was the one that they had issues with. Things can't be that simple because we never are simple about things. We do have these follow-ups from laboratories that were suspended last time. We evaluate the results from a blind sample and they can get reinstated, but then they have to get satisfactory ratings on the next normal round. Now, this time they were suppressed. So what we did is we just said, okay, as long as they do it well on everything else, we're going to mark the issue as resolved. And then we have other issues where a laboratory could have a current suspension on the number 16 and number 30 that they didn't resolve. This is a little trickier because what we kind of would have to do is evaluate whether or not they could have done well. So all we can lean on is number 4. So we can calculate what their results would have been on the number 4 since it was a satisfactory round. And if they did well, we can say, all right, you're reinstated for that. And that's about as good as we can do. But it's kind of like still not as good as having 2 shots at it with number 3 and number 4. But there's always a chance for a blind sample for somebody. So it's not really the end of the world. And I will remind people that suspension is for 2 consecutive low ratings on 2 rounds of samples. So that's 4 low ratings over the course of 2 years, which is not good. It's not like it was just a random suspension of somebody who didn't deserve to have their accreditation suspended. Anyway, that is complicated, but it always is when we have suppressed ratings.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just one of those things that happened for this round. The other thing that we're going to have to deal with too from our end is this is going to have an impact on our XPS. We're going to have to prepare for it accordingly down the road and see how we can handle this to make sure that any other samples are prepared in a little bit better fashion and we can ensure that we're sending what we need to the labs.
Yeah, anything else? So that's the gradation. Now that we've got the combined sample, we had this issue before where we did the C117 T11 wash, the number 200 wash on the gradation sample. Are we getting more than just trace? I know you talked about the fine aggregate bag, but what about the other bag? Are we getting a decent amount of material loss on the gradation sample where you can actually evaluate that wash loss?
We're getting more reasonable numbers that you would see for someone or a facility who's actually doing concrete mix design or asphalt mix design. Typically seeing first 2 rounds are around 1% to 1.5%. And Ryan and I have been messing with the gradation a little bit each year to see what we need to do to get those numbers a little bit higher. I think last year we were right around 1% or a little bit below. This year we're a little bit over. And we added, what was it, Ryan, another 200 grams of sand into the gradation. If I remember correctly, I think it was 300. We went to 500 this year. That's just going to be something we're going to keep working on and changing the numbers and changing the gradation and the values. That allows us to provide a better sample, better measure for the participants, rather than sending out consistently the same material over and over again. That doesn't provide a good means for evaluation. So we can keep adjusting the numbers and the values and doing our best to make sure we're getting reasonable data.
That's good for people to know, because if they are running these samples and they say, well, this can't be right, just consider that these samples may have been manufactured just for proficiency testing, and it may not be indicative of what you test every day. And that's not a problem with the proficiency samples. I know sometimes we get feedback like that saying that people aren't happy because this doesn't resemble what they typically test. Well, it doesn't need to. It needs to be a good evaluation for these laboratories. And the other thing is if you see rating or if you see results that seem a little odd, it's fine for you to question it, but please do not share data with other people to see what they got and then kind of change your results to match somebody else's. We actually do look for that, and we have seen cases of people sharing and falsifying data on their proficiency samples, and it becomes an accreditation issue because this is supposed to be an objective evaluation of your laboratory's quality of testing. And if you're cheating, which we would call that cheating, you may not call it that, but we would call it that, that becomes an integrity issue. So I hope you consider that when you're looking at the data and wonder if it's the right result. Now let's talk about the uncompacted voids. Not a very exciting test by all measures, but did you see anything interesting in this round?
No, not with uncompacted voids. That's usually a pretty straightforward test. The laboratories, do what they need to do to determine the specific gravity and then go ahead and run it. And, traditionally that looks pretty good. We don't really see an issue with it. Very, very rare where we would do any kind of suppression. Pretty typical for what we would see for angularity. Void content's around 47, 48%. That's pretty typical.
Yeah, and I say not exciting, but it is kind of a fun test to run.
It is. I agree.
I always like that one. I like to train people and show them how that one is. It's something that I think a kid would enjoy it too, because it's you're watching the aggregate fall down and striking it off, tapping it. Anyway, other interesting information from this sample round?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, unless Ryan, you got something else?
We can't compare apples to apples. We'll compare this year's apples to last year's apples, at least, as far as how that washing affected the finite aggregate specific gravity results. So reading that annex, the whole point of washing is supposed to lower your absorption and give you a higher bulk specific gravity. So I went and pulled our data from the last 20 years or so, looking at how it compared relative to other samples. It's definitely on the lower end of absorption, but we've had lower. So we the absorption was average of 0.475 and 0.498, actually kind of close to what we had last year. We've gone lower 2 times in the past 20 rounds, but about a quarter to a half lower than everything else. So it actually shows that impact there.
Yeah, so this is one thing too. If we see another material that's a little bit similar, we'll change our source up, and if we see the percent passing the 200 around 5%, maybe we'll keep it in there and see if we introduce any variability and take a look at it. Why not, right? That's what we're here for.
Yeah, and this material is is it all locally sourced too? Is this all Mid-Atlantic region aggregate?
Correct.
What's the farthest away material we've gotten, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, this is kind of a weird borderline, but I'm gonna call this north central Pennsylvania. It's about 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's been about the longest haul we've had.
What's the reason that we keep it relatively local to this area?
It just has to do with expense, Kim. The aggregate's cheap, the hauling is expensive. And even so too, when we got that product that was, the 2.5, 3 hours away, that plant was actually very specific in what they would provide to us. Usually we get two different sizes of stone, and number 57 and a number 67 stone. And that company said, look, no matter what, we can't send you the 67, so you have to use the 57 stone, which is more of a coarse material. It's got a bit more material on the 3/4 and 1/2 inch than the 67. And we ended up having to purchase, I think it was almost 200 to 250 tons to get what we needed. And we only needed about 100 tons. So we ended up wasting roughly half. Whereas if we can go to a quarry that's close and we can get 57 and 67 stone and use it proportionally and use it the appropriate way, we probably only need about 140 to 160 ton. So it saves us a lot on material ordering and hauling.
And then those prices would increase the price for our customers if we chose to do that more regularly.
That's correct. We have ventured into looking at trying to get material from some states that are further west, but it's difficult, to try to get, hauling trucks to go that far. Then you're talking about, paying for overnight stays. You have to worry about going across state lines with different products. We've actually already investigated rail car. There's a rail line right behind the office, and we hear train horns 10 to 15 times a day, usually in the middle of calls and meetings, but we really don't have a good depot in the area where we could actually have some product from somewhere else brought in, dumped, and then delivered. It's a possibility, but once again, logistics and expense, it's something that we really don't know if we should pass on to our customers, because it would, we want to keep it as reasonably priced as we can. But if anybody's willing to front the bill for that, we'd be excited.
What do you mean, for making a train depot?
Any of the above.
Yeah, I mean, right. So even if there's some supplier out there who's like, hey, we'd love to have our rock tested as part of your program, call us, let us know, and we'll see if we could figure out a way to make it work. I mean, it's not like we couldn't try. We just have to see how to do it. I mean, that's the hard part.
Sounds like we need to start a trucking company, AASHTO Resource Trucking Company, to handle all these hauls.
Yeah.
I'm going to say we should discuss that in a change management meeting and see how far that goes, Brian.
Fleet of trucks and just have the assessors drive around and just bring it back.
And then bring it back.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm sure they would love to drive the big rig
Some would, yes.
while they're performing their assessments.
Oh yeah, there's a couple I know that would be super excited about it.
Yeah, that's true. Some would. It would be, yeah, some would
I got
really
two
not.
in mind in particular. Yeah.
Yep. So we will table those ideas. But I think that's it for this one. As far as I know, Kim, do we have anything else on this?
No, I think you covered all the bases. I mean, you had Ryan ask the question of the accreditation program to you as opposed to me. So I don't really know why I was here in this episode, but I enjoyed your enthusiasm about the slide lock bags. Take that and cherish that moment as I'm editing this episode as well.
Yes, slide lock is the appropriate term. You can't say
Yes.
the other one because the
That's
other
a
one is
brand
a
name.
brand.
Yeah, you're correct. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, John and Ryan. And I think I'm going to tease. I don't have any details, but I'm going to tease anyway. In the future of some point, we are going to have a live recording of one of these PSP Insight episodes. So look for details in 2024, I'm assuming. You could attend a live recording. It will be virtual, but you can see how a podcast episode is made, and it will be for one of these PSP Insight episodes. So stay tuned for more details there. Thanks for listening to AASHTO Resource Q&A. If you'd like to be a guest or just submit a question, send us an email at podcast@ashtoresource.org or call Brian at 240-436-4820. For other news and related content, check out AASHTO Resource's social media accounts or go to ashtoresource.org.